Hello, this week's episode is going to be audio only because that is where I am right now. It's too much of a faff for me to do the video recording because my life has kind of been upended since my kids got out of school, but I'm committed to getting this podcast out once a week. And one of the reasons why I'm comfortable working like this and not pushing myself to get a video episode out is because I just finished Cal Newport's incredible book, Slow Productivity, and that has helped me be less resentful of my children. Because I know there are a lot of people who want them and can't have them, and I am very grateful that they are happy, healthy children, but boy, are they a deterrent to deep work, which is what Cal Newport is known for. But also his book, Slow Productivity, gives a fuller picture of how deep work can vary from season to season, and that even in the times where you feel like you're not working as diligently on something as you would like to be and you're not getting that deep work time, it can really set the foundation later on for some real progress to be made. But I'm seeing the limitations. For example, I wrote a Substack post, I think it was last week, and in the course of just writing this simple post, I think I was interrupted 12 times. So that's what I'm working with here. One of the ways I've decided to compensate for the lack of deep work and consistent scheduling is reading. I have been crazy into books this last month. I don't even know who I am anymore. I've always been someone who wanted to read more, but just didn't really make the time for it. And now I can't get enough of it. It's so good. Also, it helps me because it's less annoying when I'm interrupted when I'm reading than when I'm writing or trying to create something. It's much easier for me to jump back into where I was when I'm consuming what someone else has made. So this week I finished Educated by Tara Westover and had a whole podcast planned for that, started outlining that and have a lot to say about that book. So there will be an upcoming episode about Educated. So look forward to that. If you don't know what that book is, Tara Westover was raised Mormon in Idaho and homeschooled, which is kind of a loose term. She would be what's called unschooled. So her parents, I guess you could loosely say, supported child-led learning, or what someone from the government might call it, criminally negligent. I really enjoyed her book on so many levels. Mostly my dad was raised in Idaho. I used to homeschool my kids. And of course, as you know, if you've ever listened to this podcast, I was a lifelong Mormon. So that episode will be coming up. The other book I finished, as I mentioned earlier, is Slow Productivity by Cal Newport. The full title is Slow Productivity, The Lost Art of Accomplishment Without Burnout. If you're a friend of the podcast, you know that this is something that I struggle with. I tend to flip from one side of the spectrum to the other. On one side, I think the universe is for me. I will manifest things. Synchronicities will happen. Just follow your heart each day. Do what you love and the money will follow, all that kind of stuff. And then I rapidly switch to the other side, the Newtonian side, the cause and effect. The work will win when wishy-washy wishing won't. The problem is I'm so scatterbrained that as soon as I start working on something and getting headway, I get distracted by a shiny idea. So maybe I'm working on the podcast and then I think, ooh, I want to write some sketch comedy about that. Oh, I could make that into a little sketch. Oh, I'm going to write a Substack article about that. You know what? It would be really fun to learn ventriloquism. I'm going to have a ventriloquist on my podcast. Maybe I'll learn that. You know what? I don't play my harp enough in my comedy. I think it would be fun to bring my auto harp to some of my gigs. I just bounce around all the time, and this book was so good. If you're not familiar with Cal Newport, or specifically his idea of slow productivity, there are three main tenets. Number 1, do less. Number 2, obsess over quality. Number 3, work at a natural pace. So that's what I'm doing this week. I'm working at a natural pace, and working at a natural pace doesn't necessarily mean that you're always doing things slowly. He recognizes that there are times where maybe there's a big deadline coming up and it's a project with a bunch of people. Let's say you're a film director. Obviously, during filming, you're going to be there longer hours, you're going to be putting in more time. But maybe after the film has finished and it's being edited and then eventually is released, then you have a much more slow-paced time where you can kind of catch up and regroup. And during the course of reading this book, I came up with a new method because I would constantly find things in his book that I wanted to refer to, that I wanted to remember. So I just got, those little thin sticky notes, the ones that are transparent. I would just stick that right on the line that I wanted to remember so that it wouldn't interrupt my reading, because I know what happens when I get distracted. So the book has probably 80 little sticky notes popping out from the edges of the page. And then once I finished the book, I went through page by page to all the sticky notes and wrote down the quotes that I wanted or the insights that I had when I was reading it. And it was really helpful. I think it really helped me go through the book quickly. If I would have stopped and written down everything, I think I would have got sidetracked. Just having my notebook out, I would have been tempted to add things to my to-do list and not gotten through the book as quickly as I did. I picked the book up at 5 o'clock on a Monday, and I finished it by 7 o'clock Tuesday night. It was a very good book. In fact, I've been so crazy into books that I was on someone else's podcast this week. It's called Women Folk Revival. You can see it. I'll put a link to it in the show notes and the description so you can check it out. Two really lovely ladies. They're very big into homesteading and back to the earth kind of stuff. Herbs, natural farming, letting your kids roam around. They were definitely my people. And I just started fangirling about reading so much. And poor Mira, she has 6 kids and they're all really little right now. And she admitted that she just didn't feel like she could read. She thought her attention span just wouldn't really last that long. And I kind of feel like everyone is a reader and you can get back into it. And I think that's because I got back into it. My problem was I would read books, but they weren't always page turners. I would try to read before I went to sleep and I would get 1 or 2 pages in it and just get really sleepy, which was fine. It's like my Ambien, I suppose. But it wasn't until I found Imperial Twilight by Stephen R. Platt, which I will also link in the description because I did a full book review on that. It's about the Opium Wars in China. And I couldn't put that book down. It's a big, thick, fat book. And I did it in, I think, 5 days. I probably did 100 pages a day. I just couldn't get enough of it. So I think it has to do more with finding books that you can really get into to kind of break that barrier and prove to yourself that you can do it. Now, to be fair, Mira has a lot of little kids. So I suggested to her some kind of book that has maybe essays or short stories. Probably not a novel where you have to really remember what has happened in previous chapters, but I have found it so surprisingly satisfying to read. I know that sounds silly. Does that sound silly? I actually don't think that it does, because the more statistics that I hear about social media and the many hours that people are spending on it and how dissatisfied they are with it, I get the feeling that there are not a lot of people reading. I've even thought about creating some kind of little holster that I can wear around my waist and put whatever book I'm reading in there, so that as I'm walking around, like maybe waiting for the bus or at the doctor's office, that I just pull out my book instead of my phone. To be fair, my phone is not that addictive because I don't have any attention harvesting apps on it. The only temptation I really have is to check my email. And honestly, not that tempting, because I get emails like how to make your business show up in AI searches. They're not exactly clickbaity rabbit holes that I get lost in. One of the things that I learned about in slow productivity was the slow food movement. Now, I'd heard of this before. This is Carlo Petrini, who I just found out just passed away in May this year. Very sad. R.I.P. Petrini. He's also from a city in Italy called Bra, which I thought was funny. B-R-A, like brassiere. I just think that's funny. Maybe they don't call it a bra over there, but we definitely do. I heard about the slow food movement from my art professor in college, who had a house in Italy and she was married to an Italian. So I thought it was kind of an Italian thing. Basically, it was in response to the giant McDonald's that they built in Rome in the 80s. And it was kind of this return to traditional foods and slowing down and enjoying food together. So you could go to slow food restaurants where they serve it in communal style, their traditional recipes. And the point is to enjoy the food and enjoy the company, not about the speed in which it's delivered. I'll talk more about this in the episode that I have coming up on slow media. I just really want to make that a good, solid episode. And I knew that with the time constraints that I had this week that I wouldn't be able to do. I might be able to get it out next week. That's what I'm hoping. But slow food is not about escaping the present and revolting from it. It's about finding ideas from the past to shape the future. Slow media was modeled after slow food, the idea of choosing ingredients mindfully and preparing them in a concentrated manner. It's kind of like being deliberate about the media that you choose. Rather than letting algorithms suggest things for you, you might just sit down and make a list of things that interest you, and then you can look up different resources or ways to learn about it. That's actually how I found Stephen Platt's book about the opium wars in China, because I was very fascinated with the subject, and I don't think that's something that an algorithm would recommend to me. So with slow media, it's not a rejection of digital products, and to be honest, I actually used Claude to find that book. I told Claude, I want to learn about the opium wars. I want it to be a fact-heavy book, but I want it to be an easy read. I want a page-turner that's very well written. I don't want something too heavy and academic. And it did recommend the perfect book. So I did use a digital product to find something that was long form that I could deliberately, slowly consume. I found in my research of slow media stuff that there are actually a lot of groups popping up, like the Offline Club, which I was very excited about until I found out that all of them are in Europe, and I'm pretty sure they don't have Zoom meetups because that's kind of the point, is to be offline and in person. So I have plans to join some of those meetup groups the next time that I am in Europe, but I did find some events going on close to me. One called the Silent Book Club, Slow Living Support Group. There was one called Club for Connection, and the one that I will probably attend is at a bookshop in Philadelphia called the Anarchist Sewing Group, which, I don't know if you know this, but I know how to sew. I have sewn some of my own clothes that I wear on stage and have plans for many more. Those sound like my kind of people. I looked further and I found some more international groups, like one called Time Left. And the idea of this is that you have dinner with strangers and just talk and make new friends. I know my husband has attended some events like that because when we moved to Philadelphia, we didn't know anybody here. And that was kind of a big deal. We lost the community that we had where we lived previously, and especially being Mormon, that really helps when you move to a new area because you just start attending your congregation and you have all these instant friends. But since we weren't practicing Mormonism anymore, we realized, we don't have that many ways to make friends. And I don't want to sound judgy or mean, but I am going to sound judgy and mean. I am not always into the mom group stuff. That was one of the hardest things for me when I had kids, was I wanted to take my babies out like to the playground and stuff, but I just found a lot of the moms there really obnoxious. There are actually some very cool moms in our area. There's a really famous award-winning author whose kids also go to my kids' school, and I've really wanted to just sit down and talk with her, but she's a professor and she writes all these novels and they get turned into movies, so I just assume that she's quite busy. But she did come to one of my comedy shows, which is so cool and so supportive, so I will see maybe if she wants to go out for coffee or something. You can also find phone-free groups. There are directories for phone-free concerts, a site that I found called Canso or Conso. It's spelled Kanso. And it says it's kind of an event planner. And I went on it and I don't know if they just didn't change the name or they've grouped together with a group called Luma, Luma. But I signed up for that because there's a lot of events in my area. I just had a squint and saw there's a vinyl swap, a cocktail making workshop, backgammon, intro to oil painting. There's a mom night for printmaking with botanicals, a tomato party, and something called Summerween, which is not Homestar Runner, if any of you remember Decemberween. It's a group getting together to celebrate and discuss authors who are women of color that have written horror novels. I think if it weren't horror novels, I would want to go, but I'm not really into horror. I don't like being scared. I don't like horror movies. I don't like scary books, but they actually look like a very fun group. In addition to trying to meet people in person, there's other parts of the slow media movement. Things like reading longer essays and newsletters and longer videos rather than short, bite-sized chunks of things. There's also lots of ideas about how to use technology. Obviously, a lot of people who delete the apps off their phone make a point to not have too many tabs open on their browser, and just fewer rapid-fire triggers that we've become accustomed to. And like I said, another part of it is choosing things that you're genuinely interested in, like I did with the Opium Wars, or asking people for personal recommendations. My sister is a great resource for that. She reads a ton, and so I can just tell her something that I'm interested in. Like, is AI going to take over the world? And then she'll say, you should read this book. It's really good. Or maybe I have some kind of idea for a sci-fi book, and then she'll recommend one that's similar to the idea that I had. So that's a good way to discover new things if you don't want to use Claude or to Google search or use an algorithm. Who is a nerdy friend of yours that understands you very well, and see what they would recommend. I like that method as well because it bonds you to that person because they've read the book. And then when you read the book, you can discuss it with them. And I really like that personal touch. I also found some slow media journalism. There's one called Delayed Gratification that's based out of the UK. But the funniest one that I found was called SlowTV in Norway. And this is like the most Norwegian stuff you can think of. Like, it seems like, honestly, when I looked this up, it seemed like an article from The Onion. Okay, so SlowTV in Norway famously produced a 7-hour uncut train journey. They also live streamed a really long knitting night, salmon fishing, and a live reindeer migration. So not to confirm stereotypes or anything, but I thought that was funny. It does kind of seem at that point, why not just read a book? Like some of the slow media stuff, I'm like, rather than just watching a super long video of something, what if I just read a book that I really like? Because I think that's better for your brain anyway than consuming a slow video. I also found something called the National Day of Unplugging. That's the first weekend in March, if you want to participate in that. It's part of the analog revival movement. Again, I will cover this stuff in slow media. Maybe I'm giving away too much of the upcoming podcast, but I'm continuing to research it. I'll put examples in my video. If you haven't checked out my video podcast on YouTube, I do try to make those interesting for people, so I include video clips or little animated GIFs or things like that, which now I'm thinking, is that not very slow media of me to do those kind of retention hacks? I suppose it just feels weird for someone to stare at my face for an hour, so I try to break it up with some funny stuff to keep it light and fun. Which brings me to a question that I had while reading Slow Productivity, and my question is it possible to have slow comedy? What does slow comedy look like? Because obviously that's my profession. That's the thing that I constantly think about. And honestly, comedy these days is mainly storytelling. That's partially because we're inundated with so many forms of media that any observational joke that you could make about Twinkies or riding the subway or Donald Trump, it's probably been made by somebody before. The basic observational comedy like, what's the deal with hot dogs? Someone has probably already done it as a joke, or there's a meme or an Onion article or someone on TikTok that made fun of it. So it's quite hard to be original because there's so much content out there. So the trend in comedy right now is to tell the story only you can tell. It's very self-referential. One of the lines you'll hear a lot of comedians say is, a little bit about me. And really, if you tell stories from your personal life, that can't be duplicated. That's one of the reasons that I started talking about giving birth to a 10-pound baby in my kitchen, because I was pretty sure there weren't a lot of comedians that had a joke like that. In fact, there aren't even that many comedians that have jokes about giving birth, because most comedians are men, and a lot of female comedians, because of their travel schedule and their temperament, are not mothers. So the idea of doing a planned home birth is pretty rare. So I knew that I could tell that story and somebody wouldn't be like, oh yeah, Ali Wong has like 15 minutes on how she gave birth in her kitchen. Nope, that's pretty much mine. So I started thinking about slow comedy versus fast comedy. What is fast comedy? And I thought of a lot of these short little clips that we get constantly. And to be fair, I am guilty of this. The reels that I have posted on Instagram, I use something called retention editing, and I participated in the junk food of comedy, but please forgive me, I knew not what I did. Now, this is when I was doing that 6-month Instagram course, and I was trying to take all the advice that they gave me. A lot of the advice did not feel true to me. They wanted me to copy a lot of viral trends. They wanted me posting 5 stories a day of me backstage, or what I ordered for dinner, or what it's like getting ready for a show. And it just felt not only invasive and weird, like who cares that I had a sandwich for lunch, but also kind of insulting, kind of wanky to think that somebody would want to see my sandwich more than they would want to see really beautiful curated art. I just felt badly putting a bunch of garbage out there, and that's how I was going to attract attention and fans. And it still kills me when I look at my statistics and they tell you how many watch hours you have. And I feel some guilt in there when I see the thousands of hours that people have watched my stuff, and I think, oh no, were they doing that instead of playing with their kids or making eye contact with their friends? I'm part of the problem. So I think because of that, I've stepped back from posting a lot of things. It's one of the reasons I like podcasting, because it's nice to listen to on a commute or while you're doing dishes. It just seems like a nice, quiet way to engage without interrupting. And the whole movement of slowing down, there are suggestions like drive in silence, go on walks without listening to anything. And actually, I do that. So I'm not offended if people don't listen to my podcast, but I definitely feel an obligation to make them as good as I can. So when I think of fast comedy, I think of these short, bite-sized, kind of salt, fat, sweet, fast food combination of content that confirms stereotypes or our biases, or they're shareable because they're quick, but they're usually not that great. And that's what I found in that social media class, was that the clips that I put up that did really well were things that followed the model of high arousal emotions. We're more likely to watch something that ticks us off or confirms our bias. And that's one of the reasons that I took down my clips from Instagram, because I didn't want to be a part of that. So if we go offline into the real world, I'm wondering what slow comedy looks like IRL. I would say fast comedy shows up in the form of comedy showcases, and I actually used to run a weekly show in South Philly, and it's nice because you can give a lot of different comics the opportunity to perform, but to do that, that means shorter sets. So a lot of the comedy showcases that you'll go to, the comedians are only doing like 8 to 15 minutes each. They're comparably short sets, and to be honest, there aren't a lot of comedians that can hold attention for an hour. This is one of the reasons that when you look at a comedy special from an American, it tends to be 5 to 10 minute bits that are kind of shoved together, only linked with a short segue. Sometimes there's no segue. Sometimes someone will tell a 5-minute bit, and then as people are laughing, they take a sip of water, and then they just start into a totally different thing. It's one of the reasons that I really like doing comedy in the UK, because it's a different style over there, partially because of their festival system. Many UK comedians are much more deliberate about their hour-long shows, that there are through lines, there's some kind of a theme. There are not just callbacks where you're repeating something that you said earlier, but that you're weaving it all together in a narrative. It's more like a well-written novel, whereas the USA is more like a book that's a collection of essays that you could open any chapter and read it and not need to understand any of the previous chapters to enjoy it. When I explain the comedy that I experience over in the UK, it's kind of like a Seinfeld episode where it's funny throughout, but it's like, oh man, George lost his job because Elaine was dating that guy and she wrecked his car, and so he told Kramer this, and at the end it all just wraps up in a really satisfying way. And that's what the really good shows at Edinburgh Fringe feel like. They're very deliberate, they're funny throughout, but you're following a well-crafted story. So, inspired by the slow food movement, I started thinking about the ancient roots of storytelling. Of course, the first thing that came to my mind were the Seanchaí, the Irish storytellers. My mom told me that actually we are descended from storytellers, that our ancestors were storytellers, not just like in the country, but like my actual blood relatives were storytellers. And they were extremely important to preserving the culture, the stories, the history, the people, the myth, the folklore, all of that stuff that was on their shoulders, and they would travel from town to town telling these stories. They were walking textbooks. it's primarily an oral culture. So I looked into Irish storytellers and I found Eddie Lenihan this week, and he is fantastic. He's from Kerry and I think lives in Clare now. So if for no other reason to hear his beautiful accent, Eddie Lenihan is fantastic. He's quite old now, I think, but he did have a podcast that ran for a little while. So I've been listening to a few of those and just finding all kinds of funny. Like I listened to one yesterday about animals in Irish folklore, and he talked about weasels for a while. And apparently there is a superstition or a belief that if a weasel spits on your head, then your hair will fall out. And so there are people who work in jobs where they might accidentally encounter a weasel will wear helmets so they don't go bald. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to laugh at the culture, but I think this is funny. And the way he tells it is so delightful. There was another thing I thought was funny, and I want to look it up to see if there's any merit in it. I think it could. I think it actually could work. So it's the idea that when a weasel, so weasels are ferocious, and apparently when they bite down, they lock their jaws and they won't let go. So he said that the way that they get weasels to unlatch, like from your leg or whatever, is to carry around a stick with you. And when they're latched on, you break the stick, and then the weasel thinks it's broken your bone and it will let go and run off. I don't know if weasels really make the connection. It might just be that something scared them, but I still think that it's funny. And he talked about how his dad had a fishing bag that he was told never to look in. And I think it's because he just didn't want his kids messing with his stuff or getting hooks stuck in their finger. But one day when his dad was out, they got into his shed and looked through his bag because they thought there would be something mysterious in there. And he said he did find a bunch of fish hooks, but he also found a stick. And he thought that was in case he accidentally snagged a weasel when he was casting his line, that he would have defense. I don't know. Maybe don't they hit fish over the head to kill them when you pull them out? I don't know. That's so violent, but it's a great story, isn't it? So that's why I started looking into oral storytelling tradition. So I knew about the Irish and the bards that traveled the country. There's also the West African griot, which I'm going to look into more. I'm not sure if that's where Aesop's fables came from. And see, you get to see how ignorant I am. But this is why I love books, because I know that I'm interested in this. And so that means I can look up a book and then actually know what's going on. Yes, of course, I could Google it. But the thing is, the retention is not going to be as good. And Google does not give you great little tidbits like weasels making you bald. You get that kind of stuff from a book. Books are so intentionally written and created. There's editors. There's all these steps in the process to writing and publishing a book that authors will make it as good as it can be versus someone who's just publishing something on the internet. Now, that's not to say that there aren't great articles on the internet, but it's way better for your brain to sit down with a book in long form media and for you to have to visualize it and go through it word by word. It's so much better for you. Okay, so we've got the West African griot. Obviously, there's the Greek oral epics. I think that one might be a bit harder to find out how the Greeks traveled and shared their oral traditions, because I think it was so long ago that it might be hard for anthropologists to piece together all of that. There's Indigenous Australians. That one also has a lot to do with music as well. And then Indian oral epic traditions as well. So rather than reading separate books on all of these, which I might do, I ordered a book called Orality and Literacy by Walter Ong, which I'm very excited about because he talks about the difference between literate cultures and oral cultures and how our brains are wired completely differently when we don't have the ability to write things down. And whereas you might feel kind of high and mighty because you're literate, there are actually some downsides to being literate and to not having an oral-only culture. So I'm eager to learn about those differences. And this is all in hopes of bringing back some of the key elements of how ancient oral cultures and traditional storytelling bonded people together for thousands of years. I'm curious if there's ways that I can integrate these principles into my own comedy shows. As I've looked at my options and how I'm going to improve my own comedy, it's becoming pretty clear that I'm probably going to need to just run my own shows, because so many of the places where I'm asked to perform are really heavy with what I would consider hack comedy versus nourishing, validating, long-lasting comedy. I don't know if you've ever been to a comedy show, but because I've been to so many now, it's quite easy for me to pick out the hacky bits. But if it's your first time going to a show, it probably feels pretty mesmerizing. Maybe like going to a restaurant the first time, that it feels very sophisticated and nice for somebody to bring it out to you on a plate and, oh, wow, this was made just for me. But if you've worked in the back kitchen and you're a really good cook, you can very easily pick out quality dishes from crappy ones. So I will give you an example of somebody. Okay. There was a show or a festival or something that I was considering, and I saw that one of the people performing at this show, they were a big headlining act, and I hadn't heard of this person. So I went to their Instagram to check out some of their clips to see what kind of comedy it was. And this guy, the first clip, it actually, it was kind of hacky, but it was funny. And then I watched a few more clips, and I found that it was the exact same thing over and over. Essentially, he would find a man who was sitting with a woman in one of the first few rows, and he would make fun of his physical appearance, whether it was his haircut or that he had capped teeth that he got done in Turkey, or he was wearing a tracksuit, something like that, to make fun of his lower class status or something. And then compliment the woman that was with him and point out the disparity between their looks. That this guy is a loser, but look at this hot lady that he's with, kind of thing. And he did it over and over and over. So if you had only gone to that show, you didn't know anything about this comedian, you might think, oh my gosh, that's so funny, I can't believe it. And you're like, no, he didn't really just make that up on the spot. That's kind of his shtick. And I won't point out any Philly comedians because I wouldn't want them to, I want to build people up. I don't want to, I'm not trying to tear down. But I saw this with comedians in my city as well, that they had a formulaic way of doing crowd work where they had already written a joke and they kind of just needed a victim to place in it. Now, I'm not denying that that's funny at the time, but it is kind of a hack because you're using the tension of the fact that you, the comedian, the performer, the one with the microphone, is going after one of the audience members. And we think, oh my gosh, he's picking on that guy. And it makes us uncomfortable in the same way that if you were in class and your professor pointed out somebody in the front row and pointed out how they were always late or that they didn't do their homework or whatever, we would feel uncomfortable. And that uncomfortable feeling is tension. Laughter is a way of releasing that tension. And so a comedian, unlike maybe a teacher, will have a punchline. He'll have some funny twist that he does so that the audience can all laugh together. I'm not saying it's not funny. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but I do think it's kind of fast comedy. It's kind of hack comedy. These are not bits that you're going to remember. They're not going to change you as a person or question beliefs that you had or present something in such a way that they've noticed something that you noticed as well. And you felt like you were the only person that felt this way. And then you have a comedian sharing their very well thought out premise about XYZ. So thinking about comedians that I don't consider hack, that I can return to their jokes over and over because they're endlessly nourishing and entertaining, either because they're so well delivered or maybe because it's so well written and presented, usually in a show don't tell kind of fashion, that their jokes become part of your everyday language. That their bit so aptly describes something that when it happens again in your life, you think of their bit. I'm thinking of comedians like Maria Bamford. She has a great bit, and the premise is the idea that we're always working and scrambling, and we have all this social pressure to be busy, to be excellent, to have many irons in the fire. So that's the premise, but she doesn't say that directly. She just does a voice of somebody else. I'm not going to do the bit justice, but it's something like, so Maria, how are you doing? What are you up to? And what have you worked on? And do you have anything new coming up or anything exciting? What are you up to? What are your plans? What are you doing? Or you have anything new or something that you're proud of? And then she just goes, I finished early. Just such a great line. I finished early is, it's so good. It's so succinct. So we quote that one. Jim Gaffigan has a great bit about how we like to judge other people for things like eating at McDonald's. But even if we don't eat at McDonald's, we still have trashy habits of our own. And so his line is, everyone has their McDonald's. And I've had many conversations with my husband where maybe I'm slagging someone off and he's like, everyone has their McDonald's. Like, yep. And you do things that are irrational or unhealthy or destructive, just like they do. Interestingly, it's not just these classic stand-ups, but even someone like Tim Vine, whom I love. He has a funny bit where he has a hula hoop with a bunch of teddy bears taped to it. And he just starts singing, Teddy's on a hoop, Teddy's on a hoop. And it's just a ridiculous bit. But then in the middle of the song, he goes, I'm 52 years old. Teddy's on a hoop. Teddy's on a hoop. Just pointing out how ridiculous it is that he's a grown man singing these silly songs. Similarly, Josh Glanc, who's one of my favorites, he's a clown from Australia. And again, he's singing some really ridiculous song. And then in the middle of it, he goes, I used to be a lawyer. As in, what's happened to me? How is some self-respecting, educated man singing songs in a crop top with his hairy belly showing? Just so funny. Brian Regan, I would say, is the king of this. So many quotable Brian Regan lines that we quote probably once a week in our house. They're fantastic show don't tell stories about how silly things are. I would say one of my favorites, but there's so many good Brian Regan bits. He has one about eating fig Newtons and how the serving size is only 2 cookies and what happens if somebody eats a whole sleeve of fig Newtons and they pass out and the EMTs get there and they're performing CPR and they're like, how many did he have? Doesn't he read? It's a great... Yeah, so we say that all the time. So even though it's not this like traditional Irish storytelling around the fire with a harp and a violin playing trad music, there's just a certain quality that you start to notice if you really watch a lot of comedy, of comedians that just really, really have a distinct voice, have cut out all the fat, and found the most descriptive and funny way to get a point across. And that comes up a lot in Slow Productivity, this idea that quality takes time. His book gives many examples of people that have created really significant work and breaks down that actually it took them longer than you think it would. Like he explains Lin-Manuel Miranda took 7 years to make In the Heights, even though if you just heard about In the Heights, you're like, oh, wow, he wrote that when he was a sophomore in college. That's crazy. Yeah, but the Tony Award-winning In the Heights that went to Broadway was not the same thing that he wrote as a sophomore. That took years. Even though he released it when he was in college, it wasn't until he found other creatives to collaborate with him and to help give that maturity and for him to identify what he was really trying to say. He worked with several other people who were leaders in their industries to hone and refine that. It's the whole Rome wasn't built in a day idea. I thought Jane Austen's story was very interesting. Also a case study in deep work. While it's true that she wrote a lot when she was younger, she was very distracted. Her father ran a boys' school and she was partially responsible for food preparation. So the reason that she was writing on little scraps of paper in the parlor wasn't necessarily because she was trying to hide that she was a female novelist. She just didn't have the time or space to sit down and do really deep work, which is why I'm recording this very short podcast. That's kind of me just spitballing, and I definitely hard related to Jane Austen. Yeah, making meals for other people is a drag. It wasn't until her father passed away and she no longer needed to take care of him in his illness that their family moved to a small cottage where she wasn't entertaining guests. She didn't show up for social engagements. That's finally when she had a quiet place of her own to write, which makes me think of Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. So Cal Newport gives a lot of different examples of slow productivity from different journalists and scientists and all kinds of people that took years to develop their best work, but they did it because they were obsessed with quality. I especially like the story about Jewel that I had no idea of her really hard upbringing. But even more so than that, her commitment to making the kind of music she wanted to make and giving herself the time to develop as an artist, even at great financial risk to herself, including turning down an advance when she got her first record deal. They wanted to pay her up front. But when you do that, you have to pay it back. So there's all this pressure to sell your first album. And I guess I feel that way with comedy, that there's this pressure to create and publish the kind of crowd-pleasing comedy clips like this comedian who had this hacky crowd work bit. There's a lot of pressure to develop that, and comedians often talk about crowd work clips. Many comedians, especially older comedians, are really shocked by the ubiquity of crowd work clips because, as I've heard, I can't remember who it was. I don't want to say it was Seinfeld, but it's someone who would be Seinfeld's age and experience, said, no, crowd work is what you do when you run out of material. That's when you're bombing or you're struggling. You know, you've taken care and attention to coming up with really clever material. You don't ask somebody where they're from or if they're dating unless things aren't going well or you've run out of material. So I guess I wonder now, did the Seanchaí in Ireland, did they do crowd work? Were they asking questions of the people in the, quote unquote audience? I don't think they were. I think they came there intentionally with a story that they'd committed to heart, that they felt really passionately about sharing. So that is what has been inspiring me lately, and I am actually kind of now looking forward to running a regular show starting in the fall. I kind of want to have like a little fireplace behind me and kind of dim the lights and maybe have candles on the table to make it more cozy. One of the things that I loved in Denmark is that when you go to coffee shops and restaurants there, they have little blankets on the chairs for you to set on your lap just to feel cozy. Or the word is hygge. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But how can I make my shows cozy? How can I write material that brings us together, that's memorable? How can I create social experiences that are connecting people together and not just, this guy gets it, and kind of making stereotypical jokes about people's race or age or occupation, but real soul stuff. I don't know, maybe it's a tall order, but it intrigues me, and I can't think that it would do any harm for me to really have a grasp on how traditional storytellers developed their, I guess you would say, material, and how they captivated these audiences. Slow Productivity was a fantastic, life-changing book for me. I have a couple more of Cal Newport's books on hold. I'm currently reading Calypso by David Sedaris, one called I'm Dying Up Here by William Nodelceder. That's about the comedy boom in the 80s. I started the Barrytown trilogy by Roddy Doyle, and I read You Are the Placebo by Joe Dispenza while I'm going to sleep, because I find his books to be kind of like a sedative. I'm not saying that Joe Dispenza is boring, but I tend not to get as hype or engaged with his books like I did with Stephen Platt's Imperial Twilight or Cal Newport's book. It's kind of like before I go to sleep, I sort of want these kind of calming woo-woo vibes before I slip into the abyss. But books about comedy make me want to take notes, and I'm very awake and alive as I read those. So thank you for listening to this episode. Look forward next week to a full episode about slow media. Or I might do the book review on Educated by Tara Westover. I'm not sure, because I've just done 2 book reviews in a row, so I might switch it up with some slow media stuff. Thank you for believing in me. That's what you've done. You listened to this whole thing, unless you just skipped all the way to the very end. I don't know why you would do that, but I'm just going to assume that you've been with me on this journey, and I really appreciate that, because that's something that I found as I read Slow Productivity. If I knew I was going to make $1 million, but it was either by doing stand-up comedy only or by doing a podcast only, I would pick podcast. It's a much better lifestyle. Stand-up comedy is fun, but it's late at night. There's a lot of drinking. Audiences can be kind of rowdy, sometimes kind of stalky. I feel weird to admit that, to say I like podcasting better than stand-up comedy. That's not the case. I think I like stand-up comedy better than podcasting, but I like the lifestyle of podcasting more than stand-up. Does that make sense? That's one of the things Cal Newport talks about in choosing your career. You don't necessarily choose something that you're passionate about without considering what the lifestyle is. And I think it's really important to get to bed at a reasonable hour, and the idea of being on the road 45 weeks a year just does not delight me. And then worrying about ticket sales, like not my favorite thing. What I like is the connection with people, and that's why I like this podcast. Thanks for connecting with me. I know I haven't been asking people to subscribe or leave comments or rate this, but I do know that would help. But again, I'm more concerned with the connection. So what I would like is if you want to give me book recommendations, because I am burning through these, lads. I am on a book reading frenzy. So even if you don't rate this or subscribe to it, send me a book recommendation. Send me a book that changed your life, that you loved it. It was a page turner, please. I'm not on social media. I have an extra 4 hours a day that people who have addictive apps on their phones don't have. Please send me a book that you love. That would be a fun way for me to connect with you.
Thank you for listening to the Leah Renee podcast. If you'd like to help me grow the old-fashioned way, without having to bow to the likes of social media, visit my website, leahrenee.co. And as always,
go to bed early, you doofus!